Gifted pickpocketers can use social engineering skills to choose their victims. Many times as we travel, we may not realize that our body language makes us an easy target. Today's guest is Chris Kirsch. Chris is the CRO and co-founder of Rumble. With a background in product marketing and technical mindset, he has helped formulate go-to marketing strategy at PGP, Encipher, Rapid7, and Veracode. In 2017, he earned the black badge for winning the social engineering capture the flag competition at DEFCON. He has a passion for InfoSec, OSINT, and is a volunteer advisor for the National Child Protection Task Force. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
So can you give our audience a little background at who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I've been in the security industry for a while, over 2 decades, worked on some really interesting products and companies. So my first gig after coming to the States from Germany was working for PGP Corporation. So some folks might remember Pretty Good Privacy. So that was kind of like the first time that strong encryption was available to the average Joe and then companies and so on. And it was kind of like in the middle of those crypto wars at the time. Later, I worked for Rapid7, worked on the Metasploit product. So this is an open source project that allows people to try and attack their own networks from the vantage point of a hacker. So like ethical hacking, penetration testing, those kind of things. That was really interesting because it was a completely different world. It wasn't so much the math geeks. It was more like the hacker crowd. So less rule bound, I would say, more in that crowd. And that was super interesting. And then I worked on an incident detection and response product at Rapid7, switched to Veracode. They make software security so basically scan your code. If you're writing an application, scan your code and figure out what's wrong with it. And now I'm a co-founder in a company called Rumble. It's a company that takes care of asset discovery on your network. So basically, we just tell you like what's on your network, what's connected, so that you can manage it, so that you can secure it. And I joined forces again with HD Moore, who's the creator of Metasploit. And if you were paying attention earlier on, I got to know him at Rapid7, where we worked together on the Metasploit product.
That's a nice varied background. One of the things I recently ran across is a presentation that you did for the Layer 8 conference on pickpocketing. And I thought it was really, really interesting that, it's definitely not cybersecurity in that sense, but I could probably make the case that it is cybersecurity if people can take your company ID badge off you without you noticing, or grab your phone or things like that. And it really started thinking to me when you were going through the presentation that there seemed to be an overlap in some sense between pickpocketing skills and social engineering, not necessarily in the physical manipulation, but in the obfuscation, the misdirection, the leading the person to do something in order for you to be able to exploit that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, a lot of people think that for pickpocketing, the most important thing is to have really good, tactile sense and be really quick with your fingers. It's actually not. The most important thing is that you distract people, right? So to confuse them and direct their attention with where you touch, where you look, and what you talk about. And those are the 3 things how you can misdirect people. And then you pretty much have easy access to all of those areas that you want to get to. So for example, if I stand to your left and I have my hand on your shoulder, and I start also conditioning you, like Pavlov's dog, if I first put my hand on your shoulder, right, you're probably thinking like, why the hell is he so touchy? Like, what's happening? Is that safe, right? Your limbic brain is kind of reacting to that. And then you realize that maybe he's just overly friendly, all of that stuff. And then you get used to that hand being there, and you no longer observe it as a threat, right? Now I've conditioned you that hand is okay to be there. If I now reach down or reach over and say, oh, those are really cool shoes. Like, where did you get those? I can now reach into your breast pocket and pull something out. right? Because my hand is on the shoulder, it's already there. If you feel a little bit of a movement on the shoulder, you're probably okay with that because you expect the hand to be there, but your attention is directed elsewhere. I talk about your shoes, I point at your shoes, right? I look at your shoes. So that directs your attention somewhere else. So it's similar to So there's a ton of parallels between that and social engineering. And I actually skipped over something in my bio. I realize now that is not work related, but something that I did on the side that relates more to the social engineering, because social engineering is not something that I really did for work, but I have a personal interest in it. So when I was at my first DEFCON 23, one of the rooms that I walked into was the social engineering village. And I thought that was fascinating. I'd read a ton about social engineering, and I was really interested in the topic. I read books by Mitnick and some other folks and so on. But it never really clicked for me how it worked until I walked in the room and saw people calling companies live on stage and eliciting information from them. And I thought that was so cool. And because I also have a personal passion for the security industry, I was looking for a way to participate more in DEFCON, just rather than just attending and sitting in talks. And because I have a little bit of a technical background, and for example, with Metasploit, I can use it in a lab, but I'm not a penetration tester. I'm not a hacker, right? In that sense of the word. And I was looking for some competition or something to get involved in. And so the social engineering village was really that venue for me, where I thought, okay, as a person with actually my background is in marketing, right? I'm a marketer by trade, product marketing and so on. Now I lead sales and marketing at the new company. And in those professions, that's actually pretty close to social engineering, because you're trying to influence people, right? And so social engineering is the art of understanding how people tick and then presenting information to them in a way that gets you to the desired outcome. Same with sales and marketing. The difference is really only whether you do it one-to-many or one-to-one. And so I applied for the social engineering capture the flag contest. First year, I did really well on the report. There's a report and a stage part. Did really well on the report, but bombed on the calls because nobody was picking up my phone calls. And on the second year, I actually won the competition. So I think I had like the second highest score in history, and that was a ton of fun. That was way better than year one. So that shows you a little bit there that there is some element of luck, especially if you get somebody to pick up the phone within those 20 minutes, but also who you get on the phone and so on. And then there is, of course, planning and skill and all of that involved as well. So I had a lot of background from social engineering because I'd really gone deep on that topic. And then I'd won the competition. I was actually in Paris with my family to celebrate my birthday. And my dad got pickpocketed next to me on the metro. And I was standing there. We kind of knew who did it, but they'd thrown the wallet back on the floor, minus the money. And I was, so in the moment, I didn't quite know what to do because the wallet was there. We didn't have any evidence. Like, what do you do in that situation? It was actually really hard. And so I was researching a little bit what you should do in those situations, then how you can prevent pickpocketing. And then I actually realized that learning how to pickpocket is much more interesting, right? So I started researching that. And that ultimately ended up in this talk at Layer 8. And there's a funny story to that as well, because I was researching it and I found some resources on YouTube and so on, but they were directional, but they were not instructional. And I thought, okay, I think I've researched enough that I could give a decent theoretical talk about pickpocketing at Layer 8. And so I submitted the abstract to the conference, and I said, all right, I'll try to get as far as I can until the date, but I'm at least I'm good enough today that I'm not going to embarrass myself. And that was actually on the morning of RSA. So I submitted that, got dressed, and then went to the conference. And one of my jobs at the time was competitive intelligence. So I went from booth to booth and looked around and so on. Also very useful to know social engineering for that. And one of the booths had a pickpocketer, like a magician pickpocketer. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. Let me stop here. And then he started stealing my stuff and so on. And I after he'd done his little show, I told him like, hey, I've got this little weird obsession. I want to learn how to pickpocket, and I just submitted for this talk, but I don't actually know how to do it. Can you help me out and recommend what I should read? And he was recommending a lot of the books that I'd already read as a social engineer, which I thought was really interesting. So Navarro, for example, Joe Navarro is a guy who he helps you uh, read people's body language, for example, right? So reading the body language, and this guy said, oh, if you can read the body language and see what people are paying attention to and what mindset they're in, you can pickpocket them more easily. And I said, yeah, that's all fine and good. I've read those books, but I still don't know how to pickpocket. So can you tell me a little bit more? Actually, can I invite you for dinner tonight or drinks? I hope this is not too forward. And he said, well, I would love to, but by contract with my agent, I'm not actually allowed to give out my information at this booth, right? So I said, oh, but your name is Rory from Dallas, right? And he said, yes. And I said, okay, uh, I'll walk away now, but expect a text from me, right? So another skill set I'd learned doing the SECTF was OSINT, so open source intelligence, researching people online. This one was a super easy case because I just typed into Google Rory Magician Dallas. And of course, I found his website with a phone number. I texted him. He texted back within 2 minutes, and we met up that night. And he gave me a lot of tips on where to find these resources. And the reason that I hadn't found a lot of instructions on YouTube was that essentially there is two schools of thought for pickpocketing. There is like the street pickpockets, and then there is the stage magicians that
I was going to ask
right?
you, is there a fundamental difference between stage pickpocketing and
there is
real world pickpocketing?
Yeah. So this guy, he pointed me to all of the online magic shops that were selling books and videos and all of that stuff on pickpocketing with instructional videos. And that helped a ton because this was, for some reason, this did not show up in my Google searches. Maybe I didn't do my research right, or they were just too far down in the results or whatever, but I hadn't come across those. So knowing what to look for, like the names and the titles of the publications, helped a ton. And so, so the big difference between the theatrical pickpocketing and the street pickpocketing is basically if you're pickpocketing on the street, you try to steal something from somebody and they're often not even aware of you, and you're trying to get in and out without them noticing, right? And you don't want any interaction with them. Whereas if you're a stage pickpocket, they are up on stage, they know you're about to pickpocket them, and you have to distract them in a way where they're paying attention to something else while you're pickpocketing them. So it's a very, very different situation, right? And you're also on stage, of course you're doing it for the audience, so you also need to, like you steal something and you flash it behind their back, to show it to them. So very, very different techniques. And some of those are a little bit the same, some are different, and also some pickpocketers steal without interacting with a person. So, they might be behind you on the, what is it called? The escalators, right? Behind you on the escalators or something. And as you're exiting or whatever, or getting on or whatever, they're trying to pull it out, and they don't want you to remember their face. So they try to do it that way. But there's other techniques where a group of two people or something come up to you, maybe with a clipboard, and they try to engage you and say like, oh, can I have your signature for the Humane Society or something like that, right? So they have some pretext of why they're talking to you. And then, for example, with a clipboard, they can cover up maybe your handbag, and they steal under the cover of the clipboard, they steal out of the handbag, or they steal something out of your wallet and those kind of things. In that sense, it's more like an interaction on stage where they're actually interacting with you and they're directing your attention and covering up and so on. But it's so there's so many different styles, and it's actually really interesting to get into that because people do it in different ways.
Yeah, I mean that's the neat thing. Because as I'm watching the video, watching the presentation, you're talking with your target. I won't call him a victim, but you're talking with your target, and it's like, just let me just nudge the attention this way. Let me nudge the attention that way just to get a little closer to your goal. I was wondering, you talked about your dad being pickpocketed on the train, and the guy took the money and dropped the wallet. How for one, what did you see about the person who made you think it was that particular individual, and kind of what was the outcome of what do you do?
Yeah. So it was really interesting. So we were in a cart that was actually relatively empty, which is unusual, right? You'd think that they would target crowded cars. And so that was interesting. We went in, we were in a bigger group with like my sister and one kid with a stroller and her husband and my mom and so on, my husband and so on. And so we were a bigger group and we were moving a little more slowly than, one or two people would. And we got on the train. There was one lady in front of us, and then there were like four kids, maybe like 10 or 12 or something like that. They were like 12 years old, something like that behind us. And they were just fooling around, kind of like fighting or whatever. And we got on the train, and then doors closed and the car starts moving. And then I asked my dad, like, oh, do you still have your wallet? Because he's not always paying good attention. And he always thinks like, oh, if it's in my front pocket, it'll be fine. But they'd actually taken it out of his front pocket. He had slacks on with like the jeans have like a straight cut.
Yeah, a horizontal.
To get in. Slacks usually have the vertical cut or like diagonal cut. Those are a little bit easier to get into. They're looser pants and so on. And so they just dipped in, taken the wallet out, which was quite big, and taken some money out. And so I asked him, do you have your wallet? He tapped his pocket. He said like, oh, it's no longer there. And then this was in France, right? And my family is German. We were talking in German. And they were, as we were having this conversation, this older lady starts engaging us in conversation in German, right? She wasn't from Germany, like you could tell from the accent, and she wasn't French either, but you could tell like she spoke German fairly fluently. And she said like, oh, what's going on and so on. And my dad, like directing attention, right? My dad's like, oh yeah, my wallet got stolen. And then she said, oh, is it maybe this on the floor?
Oh, okay.
Right? Behind him. So what I think happened is the kids took it out. When he noticed, she distracted us to direct attention to her. We weren't paying attention anymore because the wallet was already gone. And then that gave the kids enough time to take the money out, throw the thing on the floor, and there was no evidence, right? So when you have street pickpockets, there's different people who do it different ways. Some people work completely alone, but oftentimes they work in teams. So there is often three positions that you have in a pickpocketing team. One person is there to block the person in. So it might be, like on a subway, they might be holding on to the handrail at the top and so kind of boxing you in so that you can't move around so much. Because if you can't move around so much, it has two advantages. First of all, if somebody's trying to get into your pocket, you're not moving around, so it's easier to reach that, and they're less likely to take a sudden step in a direction. And also, if they get caught, the person blocking can, be a little bit clumsy and delay the person getting out and running after the guy.
Yeah.
Right. The second person is the person actually stealing the wallet and or phone or whatever they're stealing, and then they immediately hand it off to a third person, right, who walks away with the wallet. And so that's what makes it really hard to actually catch people in action and accuse somebody, because even if you spot the guy taking out the phone, because he hands it off so quickly to somebody else, and it might be like he takes it out, drops it in the bag of the other guy, and the other guy walks away. It's sometimes not even like a physical handoff, hand to hand. So, and often it's done undercover. So it's like he drops it into the bag under the coat on his arm, something like that, right? So now if you say like, hey, you just took my wallet, you can say like, what are you talking about? Feel free to search me. I don't have it, right? It's very, very hard to actually, after something's been stolen to figure out what to do and to accuse somebody.
Yeah. I guess the good thing is, like with ID cards and credit cards, you at least we're able to retain those things as opposed to I'm in a foreign country and now I've lost my ID, my credit cards, and my money.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And also even phones, you can lock them down to a point where they're good for parts, but no longer able to activate the phone fully. So that helps a little bit, but there's still plenty of pickpocketing, especially in the big cities. Barcelona is really famous for that because if somebody gets caught pickpocketing and the value is under 400 euros, then they actually don't even get charged. They just walk. So they have some weird laws on the books there, and that makes it rampant where people actually come from all over Europe to go pickpocketing there because the laws are good,
Oh, that's horrible. So what can people do to kind of reduce their, I guess you probably can't entirely eliminate being pickpocketed other than by not having anything on you that can be taken, as in like you don't have a wallet, you don't have a phone, you don't have a watch. What can you do to mitigate, to at least reduce the likelihood that someone might get something from you?
There are a few things. So you can only keep a small amount of actual money in your wallet that you take in and out in the shops, right? Put the rest somewhere else where it's a little bit better hidden. So that pickpockets will look where you put your wallet back after buying something. So they might stand by an ice cream stand. You pay for something, you put it back. Now they know where the wallet is. And there's also it's a little bit of a joke, but it's also kind of true that a pickpocket waits by the sign that says, "Watch out for pickpockets," because everybody touches the place where they have their wallet.
No, that's
right.
That makes perfect sense.
It's a little counterintuitive. The second thing is put your wallet in places where it's a little harder to reach. So back pockets, I think, are bad. Front pockets are also bad. Inside jacket pockets are better, but still not entirely safe. If you have a zipper on something, zip that up. Don't have it in your backpack where it's easily unzipped or cut open and so on. So put it somewhere where it's a little bit harder to get to. Also, when you are in a situation, be aware of how people are physically to you. And that sounds a little bit weird, but I'll run this by you. There are some tricks, like if you want to get into somebody's personal space, right? If we're standing across from each other, I mean, this is a virtual situation and it's also an audio podcast, so it's a little bit harder to portray, but I'll try to paint the picture a little bit. Let's say we're standing across from each other and talking, COVID times 6 feet apart, right? So this is kind of like a safe distance. This is what's called like the public space. If you're thinking of what is it called? There's actually a science of like proximity between like people and animals and animals and animals and that kind of stuff. I read a whole book on this topic and it's interesting. And so if I stand 6 feet apart from you, that's kind of public space. If we didn't know each other and we just, I asked you for the way, perfectly acceptable distance to stand. Then let's say you're standing in a bar with a friend and you're both having a drink and you're chatting, right? You're probably closer than 6 feet apart.
Yeah.
So that's a more personal space. Then if we got even closer, that's more intimate space. So that might be with your life partner, you might get this close. But if it's somebody else, it's already uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So if a stranger approaches you, anything below the public space is kind of a little bit uncomfortable, or you should already watch out. But there are also ways that people use to kind of bypass that perception. So for example, if we're standing opposite each other super close, it's very uncomfortable. But if I move to your side and we stand parallel to each other, looking in the same direction, and maybe looking at each other and having a chat, it's less uncomfortable. And now if I pull out my phone or a clipboard or a map, right? If we're thinking of like tourists in a city, a map, and I'm looking at the map and you're looking at the map, and we literally stand shoulder to shoulder, the other person can easily reach into your pocket, and you're actually standing very, very closely to each other. So there are these ways how people get into your personal space without your having the perception that they're that close.
Is it that like when you're standing side by side, that's more of a communal, collaborative stance
Yeah,
as
you're also
opposed
like,
to
yeah,
maybe
and you're
a little more adversarial if you're face to face?
exactly, you're both looking in the same direction. It kind of feels like you're allies, right? Rather than opponents. So that's really interesting. Another thing is when you're, let's say, on an escalator, people can get really close to you at your back without you noticing, especially in a crowded place, right? And it gets even worse when, let's say, you have a what's called a bottleneck, right? A broad space going into a small door, or a an interruption of the flow, right? Let's say somebody, pickpocketing team, there's somebody in front of you, somebody behind you. The guy in front of you drops a few coins at the end of the escalator and tries to pick them up, and you need to scoot around them and so on.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody uh, touches your back or your pocket or whatever, you're probably just thinking like, oh, it's crowded and I'm trying to get through. And it's a little bit of a stressful situation. You're paying attention to the guy because you don't want to run him over. And, maybe trying to get out of the way so that the people behind you don't kind of like fall over you as they get off the escalator. So be careful with those bottlenecks, because that's a really good time for people to get in. If we think back to the situation where my dad got pickpocketed on the metro, I think it happened when we were getting on the train. The train arrives, our attention, like our focus, is on the train, getting on the train, making sure that all of our family is on the same train. That's where our attention was. The kids behind us that were horsing around, we didn't perceive as a threat, right? Because they're kids, right?
Yep.
And they're like, who cares?
And they were
Right?
doing what kids do, goofing around.
Exactly, right? And so I think at that moment when we were trying to get through that bottleneck of the door and coordinating and people getting off the train and us getting on the train and so on, that was the perfect time where they could bump into my dad. And my dad would just see it as like, oh, other people are trying to get on the train, the kids are playing, those kind of things, and you don't even register it, right? Because
Yeah.
your attention is somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I, I occasionally, well, at least recently, I travel internationally much less than I'd like to. And I always try to be very aware at least in like large crowds where there is a lot of bumping and jostling, realizing that any contact could mean something has disappeared off of my person. And, it's probably way noticeable. Maybe it makes me a good target for pickpocketing. But when I'm in one of those crowds that's like shoulder to shoulder jostling, I almost always have my hand in my pocket on my wallet.
I do too. Wallet and phone, yeah.
Have them both in the same pocket with my hand resting on them. And yes, if someone knocks me over, it's going to hurt because I'm going to go straight to the ground. But that's like in my mind, because it's like, well, I know back pocket's really easy. I hear front pocket's pretty easy. The only way I can make sure that it's still there is actually by having my hand in my pocket. But I wonder if that makes it even more noticeable. Like he definitely has something in there that he's concerned about. I don't know if that makes you more of a target or less of a target.
Yeah. I think it. So it's actually pretty easy to figure out where people's stuff is, right? You see the bulge of the phone on the front of the pants, like you can probably see a bulge of the wallet and those kind of things. You can even like lightly tap and see, is it jingling? Is it a set of keys? Is it something else, right? So that's called fanning, by the way. If you kind of like touch somebody like lightly, especially like back of the hand or something, and just see like where the items are. But if you're already broadcasting that you've got a tight hold on your things and you're aware that there is a potential threat, I think people might move on to somebody else. If I were a pickpocket, I'd target the people that are walking around with their phone texting.
Yeah.
Right? They're completely absorbed in their world. They're not paying attention to what's happening around them. So by the time, and even let's say you steal something, they notice something, it'll take them a moment to switch context from what they were texting about or reading to what's happening around them and where the person went, right? So I think this is what Rory, the pickpocket that I met at RSA, what he meant by study people's body language, right? Because if somebody is not paying attention, if we were like, I met him for dinner, like I gave him free pick of places, he picked a mall, like food court in a mall. I was very happy because it was very cheap for me, but but it was also great because there were so many people walking around, and he said, like, look at this lady. She's like, she doesn't notice anything that's happening around her. Her bag is open in the back, right? There's a phone stick, like, oh no, she had a phone in her hand, but like, like stuff sticking out, like this would be a really easy target. Or this person over there, like, if their mind is occupied with something else, then they become really easy targets. So when you're thinking about maybe you're out and you're shopping for something, or maybe you're standing in line and suddenly you're up and it's maybe a foreign country and you're trying to struggle with the language of the other person, trying to make yourself understood to buy an ice cream or something. At that point, your mind is not on your wallet, right? And so the attention on your mind is actually that's the critical thing. And it's really hard to control, because if you always focus on your wallet, you can never do anything else, because we're so single task minded, right? And so it's impossible to pay attention to your wallet all the time. You just can't.
Yeah, and I suppose some of it is just a matter of risk mitigation. Don't carry all the money you're going to use on the vacation with you all the time. That way, if your wallet does get stolen, you haven't lost all of your cash. I know people who put different amounts of money in different pockets. So when they're buying the ice cream, they never pull out their wallet, but they know that, in my right hand pocket I have a $5, €5 bill. I'm going to buy something under €5. I pull a single bill out of that pocket, so it looks like they only have, and there's little or no change. They're not pulling out a big wad of money and flipping through trying to find the right bill, showing it, broadcasting to everybody, look how much money I have.
It's not a bad strategy, right? And also, it doesn't show as much in terms of the bulge on your pants, right? It doesn't show as much what you have in there if you just have a few bills in there versus a complete wallet.
Yeah. And then I think sometimes even when I travel, depending on where I'm at, I don't actually even take my wallet with me. I might take an ID card in my pocket and a credit card and a little bit of cash. And, ID card goes in one pocket, cash goes in one pocket, plastic goes in another pocket, just to kind of spread the risk around, hoping that they're not going to get all of it in one swoop.
No, absolutely. And, I usually travel with a couple of credit cards. I leave one of them in the safe in the hotel, leave all the IDs I don't need in the hotel in the safe, those kind of things.
Yeah. And so I think as we've been talking about this, there are kind of that parallels to the misdirection, maybe even the blocking a little bit in terms of social engineering. What do you think are the kind of the most common practices if someone is trying to social engineer us that we should be watching out for?
Yeah. So a lot of times when you're getting social engineered, there is a sense of urgency and pressure that people apply, and they try to move you from a rational thinking into an emotional thinking. So what's a good example? I'm trying to think right now. For example, there is one phishing scam that I think is particularly evil, where I'll need to let me explain what you see in the email, and then let me explain how the attackers get that information. The phishing email will say, hey, we hacked your computer. We have control over your video camera and all of your browsing history. And if you don't pay us $1,000 in Bitcoin, we're going to send this to all of your friends because we have your contact info as well. And as proof, we've got your password here that we include in this email. So this is clearly a pretty big threat for a lot of people. It puts them into an emotional kind of panicking mindset, and they're more likely to react also because it's something that they don't want to talk about. They don't want to ask for help, right? Because it's an embarrassing situation potentially. And so that's how these scammers try to extract a lot of money. And it's actually hard to know how many people got hit, because a lot of people just don't admit to it afterwards. And what's really happening is there are often, as everybody knows, breaches of different websites. And it might be your like totally unimportant social media sites somewhere, right?
It's your old
And it
MySpace
gets
account.
your old MySpace account, right? So those websites get breached, and typically on those websites you log in with email and password, right? So if the database gets breached, the attacker has both your email and your password. Now, it doesn't even have to be the attacker who owned the website that's now sending you this phishing email, because a lot of times these databases get sold or just dumped on the internet and then are publicly accessible for download. So it could be anybody. There's actually websites where you can enter an email address and get a password, like a list of passwords back that were associated with email addresses in the past, right? I've actually used those websites for like online investigations and those kind of things. It's super interesting. And so when you have access to this information, now you can craft a generic email and you can match up the email address in the to line of the email and you put in the password and bingo, you've got a really compelling pretext, right? And so, but this is an example of how a social engineer gets somebody to drop from the rational to the emotional level, panic a little bit. There's a sense of urgency to do this because otherwise they'll get extremely embarrassed in front of all of their friends and family, right?
I received an email from a woman once who she says, I've been targeted with a sextortion email. She didn't phrase it that way, but they claim that I've been watching porn on my computer and they're trying to blackmail me. I've never watched porn on my computer. So she's definitely falling for the emotional because she's being blackmailed with something that she didn't do. But she's like, why are they, her big concern was, why are they specifically targeting me? So every kind of phishing scam that she'd get, she took it as a personal attack on her, as opposed to, no, you're just an email address and a password in a database that got sent out to, 100 million email addresses, hoping that you'd be the one person who would try to figure out how to buy cryptocurrency in order to send them money.
Yeah. And that's, if we're thinking back to marketing, right? Marketing, of course, we try to, as a marketer, we try to target people with exactly the message that they need to hear, right? It's called segmentation, right? If I know exactly that you're into Fortnite and I send you a marketing message for, I don't know Fortnite that well, so it's a bad example, but for something that you can buy in Fortnite or some Fortnite branded gear or something like that, right? The assumption is that you will be more likely to buy this than the average person. But there's also marketers that just, spray and pray. They sent the Fortnite gear email to 10 million people, and for some of them, it'll hit, right? And so for this person, the email happened to fit, maybe not, because she was actually not watching porn, supposedly, right? So maybe it didn't hit so well, but it still resonated with her.
Because they had because to her, the key thing that proved that it was real was the password.
Yeah. There's actually a really interesting magician in the UK. He's called Darren Brown, and he runs all sorts of weird social experiments and does documentaries about them. And there is one that I loved where basically, from the point of view of this woman, right, that was in the documentary, she received a text message from, or maybe it was a letter, and it said like, "Hey, here's £5, and I want you to go and bet it on this horse in this race, right? And I'll be in touch, right?" And so she went and she put the money in, and the horse won. And then she got a second letter with £10, and she again instructions to bet it on a certain horse, and the horse won, right? And the third one with like £20, and the horse won. And then he met her at the end, and he said like, "All right, like bring £5,000, and we're gonna bet it on something, and you're gonna get a lot of money," right? So she went there, she betted on the horse that he told her, and she lost. So what's the, like, how did he do it, right? So he provided value. He kind of built trust over time with this one person. But how did you know which horse won, right? Because it was public horse races. What he did is he sent this letter to like 1,000 people, one for each horse in each race. And then he said, all right, now for the second round of letters, I reduced it to only the people that won. And for the third round, I reduced it to the people that won. So he selected out, but for the people that he was targeting, they all won all 3 races, right? So in the end, she bet on the horse, she lost, and he gave her the money back because he said, like, hey, this was an experiment and it's for a documentary. But this shows you that just because you're seeing something anecdotal from one perspective doesn't mean you understand the entire scheme, right? I highly recommend, like, if you look for Darren Brown on YouTube, he's got a ton of these kind of shows on. He's got 3 shows on Netflix as well on manipulating people, social engineering people. It's super, super interesting from a psychology perspective. He's got one show, I think it's on Netflix, I think it's called Push, where he gets somebody within 90 minutes of manipulation to push somebody else off a building.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it's super interesting. There is one where he gets somebody through influence and manipulation to take a bullet for another person. And the third one is about basically these like preachers and healers and like how they do things. And he does a live show where he does it and then explains how they do it and that you shouldn't believe in it.
Oh, wow.
So he's a super interesting guy, exposing all of these scams, and maybe he's somebody you should have on the show.
I will definitely link to him in the show notes, and he'll definitely be someone I will look up as a potential guest.
Yeah. He's definitely well known in the UK because he had a lot of shows on probably BBC or something like that, and but he's less known in the US. But most of his shows are on YouTube, and then also 3 shows on Netflix. There's also another one where he this is a 2-part series where he basically makes somebody believe that the world has ended and is overrun by zombies. It's insane. It's really insane.
Like, I think about, like, when you're talking about the one who got the money and the guy was just, to the receiver, it looks like, oh, he got it right 3 times in a row. Well, he didn't get it right. It's hard when you receive an email to kind of flip it and, like, okay, could this exact email have been sent out to 100 million people? And if so, how would they do it? Like, we don't think to try to deconstruct when we receive stuff. It's just, oh my gosh, it's about me. It's got my name. It's got my password. They must know something that I don't know.
Yeah, there's another one which is much simpler to explain, where he basically recorded a video and he said, I can control how a coin lands with my mind. And he shows the coin and he says, like, it's got heads and tails, and I'm going to let it land on head, I don't know, 10 or 20 times or something like that. And this video is unedited, it's uncut. You can see the whole procedure, and the coin is never out of the frame. And he does it, and he hits it 20 times, right?
In a row, like heads 20 times. Okay,
heads 20 times in a row, and the likelihood of that is super small. What he did is he was standing there all day recording videos until he hit it 20 times. And he only showed you the one where he hit it 20 times, right?
I was about to say, well, he could have recorded the video a whole bunch of times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's important. Like, the sample that you're seeing is not necessarily the true sample size. You're only seeing the one sample that the person wants you to see. So, like, how do we protect ourselves against social engineering? Like, how do we know when people are trying to manipulate us or push us, nudge us, just to give up just that little next piece, which they can use to leverage somewhere else?
Yeah. I think it's a hard question to answer because it's so varied. When you are put under pressure, especially by somebody that you don't know, always take a moment to pause and say, hey, first of all, ask yourself, like, tell yourself, like, okay, I'm in a situation where I'm emotionally stressed, I'm under time pressure. Do I really have the right information, and am I in the right frame of mind to make this decision right here, right now? And there are rarely situations where you can't say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable making that decision right now. Let me call you back. Right? So you can take a moment, reflect on it, maybe ask somebody else for their opinion, and then proceed. When you get a call over the phone and you don't know the person personally, and they're asking you for information that you may not want to give out, also say, hey, can I take down your number? And then go verify who they are and then call them back. And because that would, if I look at the social engineering, CTF, and a lot of the calls that I've seen in my own call, if people had done that, I would have been dead in the water, right? I called basically in my situation where we're targeting companies. In that year where we're targeting toy and gaming companies, I targeted the retail outlet of a toy company, and I phoned in and I claimed to be Mike from IT, basically, right? I said, hey, like, are you guys open right now? Because I'm not getting any booking data from your POS systems, right? And so he was trying to help me, and through that, I built rapport. I asked, very easy questions. Hey, just a quick question. Are you guys open right now? That's not a question where you'd say, like, oh, I'm not really comfortable answering that, right? That's kind of like you would tell that to any customer who phoned up. Then I said, hey, I don't have a lot of time right now, so because I need to pick up my kids. I don't have any kids. I was lying, shocker, right? That call. So I wanted to tell them, hey, I'm not going to keep you on the phone for ages. I need to go. Don't worry about it, right? So that's actually a really good tactic also when you're in sales doing cold calling, for example.
It's your own urgency. You're not putting the urgency on them.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So because when somebody phones you up, your first thought is like, oh my God, I don't want to talk to this person. Are they going to hold me up forever? So if you tell them, oh, I need to go in a second, but can I just ask you real quick, XYZ, right? It also puts a little bit of time pressure on, but not too bad. And then I asked him questions of, I increased my asks incrementally. So basically, are you open right now? Would you be willing to help me troubleshoot this? Do you have internet access right now? Like, can you get to Facebook, right? He's probably gone to Facebook a million times, right? So that seems safe. All right. Now, can you go to this internal server? Can you reach that one? Can you reach this external website, right? So I'm increasing my ask every time. And then at the end, I had him where I told him, like, oh, I'm going to send you a new router. Can you unplug the old one, plug the new one in, and just throw the old one away or whatever? And at that point, if I manipulated the router, I would have been in their network. And there were a lot of other ways I could have gotten in. I got him to go to a website of my choice where I could have exploited his browser, all of that stuff. So yeah, so in that case, if he'd asked me, hey, I'm sorry, I don't know you. Could you give me your name and number and I'll call you back, right? He could have, if he trusts my number, maybe I still win and he calls me back, right? So never trust the number that you're given. Always research, like, is it the right number range for that company, or can you go through the switchboard, ask for the person, and those kind of things.
And I suppose COVID makes this worse because, oh, well, I'm working from home and so I can't answer my desk phone. Can you call me on my cell phone?
Yeah, absolutely. Another way to spot a scammer, and this is more for the longer cons, when you really have somebody who's trying to scam you out of money, they try to trust. They show you trust first, so that you reciprocate with trust. The interesting thing is when people think about trust, they always think it's bidirectional. We trust each other, right? But if you if you've ever like studied IT security, like trust is actually goes in one direction. I trust you, so therefore I'm doing what you say, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you trust me and you do what I say. But most people think that if they show that they trust me, I should trust them back. So that's oftentimes a model that scammers use to and con men use to get rapport and trust with the other person. They might lend them money. They might ask them, "Hey, can you look after my laptop while I go to the bathroom?" You know, those kind of things. And then after they build the trust, now they're asking you for something in return.
Now they can then turn around and exploit that trust.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
exactly.
you now, well, you trusted me, I should trust you. Now when they make an ask, oh, well, I have to reciprocate.
Yeah, absolutely.
The law, was it the law of reciprocity exploited?
Yeah. And especially with trust, it's even more, right? Reciprocity can also be a simple act of, you know, the cult member like handing you a flower and saying, "Hi, you know, like this is a gift from us," and then they ask you for a donation in return, right? It doesn't have to just be trust; it can be other things. But with trust, I think it works really, really well.
Yeah, it's we're wired to rely on trust, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That if we don't have trust, how can I sleep at night if I don't trust the person in the room next to me, or that the door is going to be locked, or those sort of things? We're very much wired for that. Well, let's wrap up here. We're about an hour in so far, and this has been really an incredible conversation. Any parting words before we talk about where people can find you?
So if you are if you're listening to this as a private individual, I actually have a page on the medium.com site. If you just search for Kirsch Medium Identity Fraud, you find a 13-part plan of how you can protect yourself against scammers and online scammers and so on. That's most of those resources are entirely free or very low cost, and I don't participate in any of these in a financial way. I wrote that up because I realized that I was giving advice to a lot of my friends and family about those things, and I thought, okay, why don't I just write them up and I can spread the word a little bit more efficiently. If you're listening to this as an IT or IT security person and you're in that role, I would appreciate if you came to rumble.run and checked out our asset inventory solution. If you're working for a small company with less than 256 assets, then you can actually use the solution completely for free. A lot of people use it at home to figure out what they have connected on the network, and they often figure out like weird and wonderful things that they didn't know they had or didn't remember they had. And that takes all of 10, 15 minutes to set up.
Or you find out that there's way more things on your network than you thought you had on your network, even though they're purely legitimate things on your network. I ran one of those, unfortunately not with your product, with a different product.
Well, shame on you.
Well, I didn't know about your product at that time, and I was just amazed at how I was like, oh, but that's right. Oh, that is connected. Oh, gosh, that is connected. And I started thinking through I really need to update my list of where everything that needs a firmware update monthly, or at least a check. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's way too many devices that are connected.
Yeah. And on your home network, yes, you might get owned at home and so on. It's more for the interested parties that do that for a job, that are also geeking out at home, and that's perfectly fine. But if you're running a corporate network, there is this old story of the casino that got hacked because they had a vulnerable thermostat in the fish tank, that was internet connected. It's the weird things that can get you owned, but it's also sometimes your unmanaged devices, all of that stuff on the network. Yeah.
Well, and there's so many things that we even when I'm talking about my house, there's so many things that we forget that are connected, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Particularly
absolutely.
if you've, it's one thing if you were the IT person the entire time with the organization, but I don't know any IT person who was the original IT guy, so you don't know what you've inherited.
Exactly. There's so much legacy stuff out there. It's ridiculous. And everybody's afraid of unplugging it, right?
Yeah, there's that Windows XP box in the storage room that no one knows what does, but no one's going to unplug it or reboot it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And if people want to find you online, where can they find you?
So my Twitter is Chris_Kirsch. On Medium, I'm Chris.Kirsch, and on LinkedIn, I'm just Chris Kirsch. So it's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
That's awesome. We'll make sure to link to your Medium resources, link to Rumble in the notes as well as your social media accounts. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Pray podcast. If you found something in this episode actionable or noteworthy, share a comment by leaving a review at easypray.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Chris Kirsch can be found at easypray.com/79.